Hey everybody, it's Master Gallengeist here, bringing you my review for the movie Encanto on Disney Plus. And I overall enjoyed this movie. I had seen it and wanted to kind of see what was going on about it, and since I'd kind of had a lull, I thought, alright, let's see how this movie goes. And it's definitely your typical kind of Disney movie. I'm not too much into musicals, but usually with Disney movies, if the music and everything kind of works out pretty well, I'm never really like completely annoyed with it. And these musical parts that they had in here worked pretty well. I didn't get annoyed that one was getting overly long or whatnot, or just being like, I kind of get the point already. You know what I mean? Where sometimes that can kind of happen. Oh, and kind of a thing. I mainly have this because I'd watched Sweeney Todd one time, and the thing is, the audio kind of shit was kind of completely fucked into that. You had to turn, we had to turn up the volume so fucking loud to hear the dialogue that without any warning to when the musical shit was coming out, it would blast our asses out. So that doesn't happen here. I know that's a weird kind of thing to bring up, but when you're dealing with a musical thing, if the audio is not balanced to where it's like, hey, all right, we're hearing singing, we're hearing dialogue, and you're like trying to balance. It's like I can barely hear him, so you turn it up. And you're like, yeah, and then you get your ass blasted into another state while you're trying to fucking like, the music popped on. You know what I mean? That doesn't happen here, so good on them for that. So we are introduced to our characters. It's set in Colombia, and we see this group kind of fleeing this kind of armed conflict going on. And that we see this woman with 3 babies, and her husband Pedro goes to kind of confront them and to save time for him, and he ends up losing his life, and she gets this miracle, this candle that creates this magical kind of boundary, this Encanto that like surrounds them with mountains, so they've kind of got their own little protected thing, while she's also with other groups of people. If you're kind of wondering, hey, how would she be okay in there, and how she would have a family that wouldn't have completely weird inbred shit going on if that didn't happen? They kind of give that just like, all right, cool, we're not like the hills have eyes situation yet. But we see that she gets this candle that allows some crazy ass shit to happen, like creating a house that's pretty much sentient and can think and shit like that, which it's really kind of interesting to watch this as my older self. Like, my younger self would be, oh, cool, a house that does that kind of shit. Whereas I've lived long enough to be like, I would question that house to see if it would fucking eat me. And whenever I see some kind of, like, magical system involved, I'm like, I go complete Doctor Strange mode of, like, what is the cost? You know what I mean? I don't always go to, like, dark places, but those are just some kind of things that pop into my head that, thankfully, that doesn't go on here. It's mainly just your typical kind of Disney kind of stuff. So it follows its usual kind of template and everything, with its own kind of twists and flavors, which isn't really wrong or bad. Normally, if you've gotten into a decent kind of formula, it works for a certain reason. And this one has your typical kind of thing. We are introduced to the family about 50 years later, and we see Mirabelle pretty much tell this group of kids about the family madrigal, her family, and we see all these different kind of powers that this miracle continues to provide, other than just a house. We've got Luisa, who's like super strong like Hercules. We got Isabella, that's able to do flowers and everything. Dolores is able to hear pretty much everything. It's really kind of interesting to where you see how the powers are kind of divided up. We see that Mirabelle's mother is able to create food that heals. Badass. One of her other family members can pretty much shapeshift. One of her aunts is able to pretty much have control of the weather. However, it's kind of tied to her emotional state. So you get some, you lose some with that. And they're going through this whole kind of thing. And it's nice. It's a pretty good number because it's catchy and it's able to give us plot relevant information while also demonstrating that plot relevant information as well. So we know that Mirabelle does not have a gift. Like, when she was 5, because evidently that's what the timeline is, you go to the door and hers didn't work out and they just kind of like have her on. at the house doing her usual kind of stuff. She feels in the way and everything like that. We see her because that is kind of pretty much her kind of song that she goes through when we see one of the youngest, Antonio, going to get his power, his gift, which turns out to be able to communicate with animals. It's like, all right, cool. And she's kind of trying to be like, hey, I kind of want to be included too, kind of thing. Because you got all these people who are able to do all these fantastical things, and you're just doing the regular kind of shit. I kind of definitely get her kind of point of view. And the great kind of thing is, you're able to kind of get everybody's point of view in this movie, and it doesn't feel completely like ham-fisted or unsubtle, though at some points it's like, yeah, that's not subtle whatsoever, because you're enclosed and it's gotta like break the shit out and everything. So the thing is, during Antonio's kind of gift receiving ceremony, Mirabel sees shit going on with the candle and the casita breaking and cracks forming, and she's like telling people about it, and then and you don't see any of that stuff going on, and her grandma's like, stop harshing my groove, stop like all with the negative waves, all that kind of shit, and they just keep going back to partying, and I'm like, alright, I'd at least take that shit seriously or whatnot. And we've also got this whole thing with Bruno, who's able to see the future, but he kind of left. And people were like, we don't talk about Bruno. Because his power was seen into the future, and everybody was like, it's all negative! And he's like, whenever somebody has to deal with frickin' seeing the future, it always, like, gets screwball-y with the person. It's like, if they're intentionally being a dick, that's one thing. And that's the kind of vibe we get in the beginning where people are like, we don't talk about that. But then we get on later and he's like, I'm just trying to like help my family. Well, we see that she's going and she's trying to figure out more what's going on, while the grandmother is pretty much trying to do more marriages and kind of keep the magic alive her way. I kind of wish it's really kind of weird. I know that this is like almost 2 hours, but I kind of would have rather had them dive a little bit more into the grandmother's machinations for how to keep the magic going, because it doesn't seem like anybody has a concrete handling of what needs to have this miracle thing tick. Though granted, it seems to be tied to the emotional state of the kind of units connected to it. We're not really given, she's like, oh, we just got to keep adding more people, making sure that we keep the family going and utilizing these gifts. I think that's her kind of thought process. Granted, it's kind of tied even more to losing her home, losing her husband, and trying to make sure that shit doesn't happen again. Understandable. However, trying to like iron grip the family and everything and just utilizing people like she does isn't the correct way either. It's a good kind of showcase of how if you are not careful and don't deal with your trauma, you then kind of visit that trauma upon other people. So we see that Mirabel kind of like goes through her own little quest. It's not much of like a big kind of quest. It's more kind of like internal and localized within the area, because I mean Encanto is like but you see that Luis is kind of like freaking out and everything. She goes into her spiel about like her powers. And one thing I will definitely hit this for, she brings up Hercules in her song, and it's a Disney movie, and they don't utilize the Disney Hercules. I'm like, that's a golden fucking opportunity. Granted, I don't want it to take away from Luisa, and now she's expounding upon, she's got all these expectations because she's strong, and she's supposed to be able to hold all this stuff. And I'm like, damn, I really empathize with that being an older sibling and everything, because, hey, you're usually, just because you came out first, you kind of have to go in and kind of check this shit or do this shit, and I don't mind that to kind of like help out your siblings and whatnot, but if that expectation isn't handled correctly, it does a lot of pressure that like fucks with people, as we definitely see with Luisa, and we also see with Isabel. Isabella? Yeah. Isabel. Shit. Mirabel's other sister. Sorry. But she's freaking out about losing her powers or whatnot, and she's like, screw this. The grandmother, of course, is trying to get Isabella, why am I blanking on that kind of name? Uh, some of them just get a little bit. Isabella, yeah. Um, because we definitely see the two different kind of sides, because she's utilized for her strength, whereas Isabella is utilized for her perfection, i.e. she can make flowers and everything, and she's only kind of stuck and stymied into that one kind of thing because she does it so well, and she's pretty much being utilized to marry this other dude. And the thing is, him and Dolores actually have feelings for each other that we see. It's a really kind of weird little subplot that's just put in there for a little bit of drama's sake, I believe, but it could have been wind out a little bit better. But of course, we see that before that kind of happens, Mirabelle goes up to kind of Bruno's room to go in the tower to see kind of what's going on, and she has to deal with all these stairs and everything. Goes in, sees this kind of mirror thing that she's able to piece together, and it shows that she's in front of the cracked house. Her father sees and says, "We'll fucking deal with this later." But of course, during the whole kind of proposal kind of thing going on, Dolores is kind of freaking out. She's like, she went into Bruno's room, she's doing all this stuff, and it's pretty much going to affect the family's magic. And of course, the proposal doesn't go through well, and the grandmother is pissed off at Mirabelle. Why did I say Mirabella? But we see that she's trying to figure out other kind of things, sees that rats are kind of going into the wall and all that, and then we find out that Bruno's in the house. And he never left. He's always wanted to be with the family, and she's trying to figure out more about Bruno's vision and everything. And he's like, listen, we really can't get to the place that I usually do because I need a big space. And she figures out to utilize Antonio's room because it looks bigger on the inside. Doctor Who reference. I appreciated it. And they go in, they utilize it, and she sees that she needs to embrace Mirabella. Not Mirabella. Why am I fusing them together? Mirabelle is embracing Isabella. So she kind of goes in. We learn all the kind of stuff about Isabella and how she hates these kind of expectations. She starts utilizing her powers in kind of different ways because she made a cactus because it was kind of tied to her emotional state. And then she starts doing all this crazy ass weird shit, and Mirabelle's like, hey, this is pretty cool. And they embrace, and we see that the magic is working out. The grandmother's like, what the fuck are you doing with your powers? And they start fighting and everything, and Mirabelle blames the grandmother, and the casita kind of just destroys. The candle goes out and everything, and Mirabelle is freaked out and runs. We see the Encanto splits open, and she kind of runs off to the river where her grandfather was killed. And then, of course, the grandmother kind of, not completely info dumps, but we get more kind of information on that whole kind of front as the rest of the family are kind of looking for her and all that. And Mirabelle understands her grandmother now, but also the grandmother understands that she'd been putting undue expectations and trying to, in her attempts to make sure that she didn't lose her home again, she was utilizing bad tactics and doing bad things to her family and creating all this stress and everything that was mucking with their gifts. And see, the thing is, as that went off, so did all the gifts as well. And Bruno kind of comes up and like, hey, tries to kind of get everything, but Mirabelle's like, hey, we're all good. Let's just go back. And they go back to kind of see what's going on. Her mother embraces her and is like, what the hell? We're glad you're okay. And then we see that the town folks, who have been pretty much the beneficiaries of all the gifts and everything, are like, hey, we're sorry about your house. Let's build you a new one. And I'm like, yes, that is the bare minimum that you guys can do. Now, granted, I'm not shitting on the townsfolk because they're essentially... That's another kind of weakness of the film. There's a lot of kind of cool stuff that they could really have dived into. But granted, their objectives weren't that. It was the kind of family kind of conflict, and I get that. However, we're seeing this as like, hey, they could have really delved into, hey, is the town taking them for granted or not? But it's really kind of cool to see the town be like, hey, they build everything back up. They have Mirabelle's doorknob that they put as the new doorknob for the main entryway, and she does that, and of course it utilizes itself, and I think is essentially making it so that the family is kind of like the source of the miracle at this point, and revitalize the casita. That's back alive. Everybody's got their gifts back, and I'm like, ooh. I don't know how I feel about them getting their gifts back. I don't hate it. I think it's more down to the execution of it and how it kind of just muddles the message a little bit. Like, granted, they are getting through and trying to be like, you're more than your gift. You are the gift and the miracle rather than your super strength, your ability to grow flowers, control the weather, like anybody else that comes through, thunder farting like a cloud out or something like that. You know what I mean? It's kind of, it's like, alright. It just muddies it to me. Now, granted, I understand it's trying to like, hey, we're getting back to status quo, we're getting back to a new kind of thing. They now have another chance to kind of go through with this. So, I do get that, and I do like that kind of message as well. I just think it's kind of, it's how it's executed that I kind of have issue with, and it's not the worst way possible. I mean, if it had went any worse, their powers could have been amplified and they could have became demon lords lording over the Encanto and everything, but that didn't happen. You know what I mean? I don't want it to go completely dark and bleak, or that they get their house built back up and then the townsfolk are like, you know what, screw you motherfuckers, and then just like kill them or whatnot, and then just jammed out. I'm fine with like happy endings and stuff like that, and things where it's like, hey, we've learned something, we're back to where we were, we rebuilt, let's try and make sure that we don't make the same mistakes again. That is kind of cool. I just wish it had worked a little bit better for me. But overall, I enjoyed this. It was a different kind of more introspective kind of Disney movie where there wasn't as much going on the outside, like an external kind of journey completely. I mean, we did go to a little bit of places, but it was more centralized and localized to dealing with this kind of family dynamic, which was pretty interesting. I mean, bog standard kind of stuff. You're dealing with all these, you got your magic stuff, you got your family drama, which is typical kind of Disney kind of thing, and you get your resolution, and I thought it was good. I mean, I enjoyed it. Music didn't annoy me. They kept to it to pretty good lengths, so where that I didn't think that any one song or whatnot overstayed its welcome, and did what it needed to do in expounding upon information and understanding at those points in times and even on characters. So I would definitely recommend this as a family movie. Definitely more on the character development front. I do like the character examinations that they did here. Not much action, so if you're a big action person and you're like, hey, I need something to keep my attention or whatnot, or want to see some cool ass shit or whatnot, this is not going to be for you. And trust me, there are different kind of Disney movies that would have those kind of action things in mind and whatnot. So keep that in mind when you're like movie night. Now, would this be scary for children? Not really, I don't think. Bruno's kind of stuff could be a little bit nightmarish maybe, but not very nightmarish at all. There's not a lot of nightmare fuel here, so if you're watching it at late at night, I don't think that would like affect it too much. You know what I mean? With any kind of young kids or whatnot. Yeah. I definitely recommend this for mainly the character development kind of stuff. That was the strongest aspect of the film, and I kind of appreciated it. Not that I dislike action or anything like that, but it was kind of nice to kind of see that kind of tact taken. Yeah, that's about it that I've got to say on this. So, yeah, those are my opinions on the movie. Tell me what you guys think in the comments below. If you liked it, if you didn't like it, if you agree with me, if you disagree with me. Also, like and subscribe, and I hope you have a good day.